In the early months of 1943, a shadow war was quietly unfolding across the European continent. While headlines chronicled the titanic clashes at Stalingrad and El Alamein, another, far more secretive struggle was being waged in the narrow streets of Paris, the winding alleys of Lyon, and the industrial centers of occupied Belgium. This was the war of the couriers, highly trained men and women who risked everything to transport intelligence that could alter the course of battles, sabotage enemy operations, and save thousands of lives. Among these couriers were British Special Operations Executive (SOE) agents, American Office of Strategic Services (OSS) operatives, and members of the French Resistance, all moving in near total secrecy through a landscape crawling with Nazi checkpoints, informants, and Gestapo agents. The task of these operatives was deceptively simple in description but deadly in execution: carrying coded messages, microfilm, and strategic documents from one Allied contact to another. Yet each journey carried a weight few outside the intelligence community could imagine. In Paris, SOE agent Virginia Hall, one of the most celebrated Allied spies despite a prosthetic leg, would later remark in her diary, "One wrong turn, one wrong address, and the streets themselves seem to conspire against you." Her words capture the constant tension these couriers faced, as every shadow could conceal a German patrol, a collaborator, or a trap meticulously laid to intercept them. In London, the OSS meticulously planned routes into occupied France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Couriers often moved by train, bicycle, or foot, carrying briefcases packed with microfilm hidden in hollowed-out objects, combs, coins, or even loaves of bread. Safe houses dotted the continent, managed by trusted members of the resistance who provided temporary refuge, forged identity papers, and crucially, guidance through enemy-held territory. Yet these networks were fragile. A single compromised contact could unravel months of preparation and place lives directly in the crosshairs of the Gestapo. By March 1943, the first troubling reports began to filter back to London and Washington. Couriers scheduled to arrive in Lyon and Brussels simply never appeared. Messages went undelivered, rendezvous points stood empty, and operatives' fates were unconfirmed. These disappearances were not rare accidents. Rather, they suggested a new, unsettling pattern. Intelligence officers feared that German counterintelligence had begun to penetrate the Allied courier networks, exploiting every weakness with lethal precision. The human toll of these operations is difficult to overstate. Couriers were not soldiers armed with rifles and grenades. They relied on wit, courage, and disguise. Their tools were cleverness and nerve. They navigated occupied cities under false identities, sometimes working alone for weeks, relying only on coded instructions delivered in secret. Diaries and post-war testimonies recount moments of near discovery: an unexpected inspection at a train station, a Gestapo officer noticing a hand tremor, a local collaborator who suddenly appeared too helpful. Every movement was a calculated risk, a step along a tightrope stretched above a pit of lethal consequences. Historical context underscores why these missions were so vital. In 1943, the Allies were preparing for operations that would eventually culminate in D-Day. Intelligence on German troop movements, fortifications, and the status of resistance groups was indispensable. Every lost courier represented not only a missing person but a potential breach in operational security, an interruption in the chain of critical information that could save or cost thousands of lives. Operational manuals from the SOE emphasize secrecy over all else, yet they also recognize the inherent danger. The success of the mission is paramount, but the loss of an agent is never considered trivial, read one memorandum dated February 1943. By the end of March, tension within the Allied command reached a fever pitch. Investigations began in earnest, but the information was scarce, fragmented, and contradictory. Couriers seemed to vanish without trace, some captured, some presumed executed, and others whose fates would remain mysteries for decades. Reports from occupied Europe hinted at arrests near safe houses, suspicious trains where passengers simply disappeared, and encrypted messages that never reached their intended recipients. The realization settled heavily over Allied planners. This was not an isolated problem. It was a network under siege, a silent war waged in the shadows, where the stakes were measured in lives and intelligence that could turn the tide of the conflict. As spring turned to summer, the stories of these couriers began to seep into the diaries and operational records that would later become invaluable historical sources. Each disappearance left gaps, both operational and emotional, among commanders and fellow operatives. And yet, even amid the fear and uncertainty, the work continued. New couriers were trained, new routes mapped, and the dangerous ballet of intelligence delivery persisted, shadowing the broader, more visible battles of the war. But as the Allies prepared for increasingly bold operations in France and beyond, one question haunted every command post, every clandestine safe house: who would be next to vanish into the uncertainty of occupied Europe, leaving behind only a whisper of a mission never completed, and a question that would linger for decades to come? By mid-1943, the pattern of disappearances among Allied couriers had become impossible to ignore. Reports from Paris, Lyon, and Brussels revealed that operatives sent on routine missions were failing to arrive at their destinations, leaving intelligence officers in London and Washington scrambling to understand what had gone wrong. These were not the tales of reckless inexperience. Most of the couriers were among the most capable and well-trained in the Allied intelligence community. British SOE agents like Pearl Witherington, American OSS operatives such as Virginia Hall's counterparts in France, and local resistance couriers risked everything, yet some simply vanished without a trace. The streets of occupied Europe, normally bustling with civilian life, had become hunting grounds where one misstep could mean death or indefinite capture. The disappearances were both tactical and psychological blows. In Brussels, a courier scheduled to deliver decrypted German naval plans to the OSS vanished en route to a safe house near the Ixelles district. Surveillance reports later indicated a shadowy figure had been following him for hours, but the trail ended abruptly at the Morals market, leaving no evidence of arrest or escape. The ambiguity fueled paranoia. Were these disappearances the result of meticulous Gestapo counterintelligence? Or had the Allied networks been infiltrated by collaborators? Every missing agent raised a host of questions that could not be immediately answered, and each unanswered question threatened the delicate balance of operational security across the continent. Historical context helps explain the complexity of the environment in which these couriers operated. In mid-1943, France and Belgium were heavily occupied, and Nazi intelligence operations were sophisticated and pervasive. The Abwehr and the Gestapo had extensive networks of informants, and double agents were a constant threat. Allied couriers were often forced to rely on a patchwork of safe houses, resistance contacts, and coded messages that could be intercepted or misinterpreted. The smallest error, a misremembered address, a delayed train, an overheard conversation could be fatal. Diaries from SOE agents reveal the constant pressure. Every time I left a safe house, I felt the eyes of the city on me. One wrong turn, and the streets would swallow me whole, wrote a young British operative stationed in Lyon in June 1943. The mystery deepened as the OSS attempted to track the movements of missing American couriers. One operative, sent to deliver strategic maps of the Ardennes fortifications, disappeared in transit between Liège and Charleroi. Investigations revealed suspicious activity around train stations and inns along the route, suggesting that the Germans had learned to anticipate courier patterns. Yet the details remained elusive. Notes recovered from other missions indicated that some couriers had encountered strangers offering help that appeared genuine, only to vanish moments later, raising the specter of betrayal. The lines between friend and foe were blurred, and trust became the most valuable and most fragile commodity in occupied territories. By late summer 1943, intelligence officers in London began cataloging the disappearances, attempting to identify patterns. Some anomalies emerged. Many missing couriers had been assigned similar routes, suggesting targeted disruption by enemy intelligence. Other disappearances seemed random, as if chance and circumstance alone were responsible. Operational reports noted that the German counterintelligence was particularly vigilant in Paris and northern Belgium, but some losses had occurred in seemingly low-risk zones like rural Normandy, adding to the uncertainty. Commanders faced a chilling conclusion: the network was vulnerable everywhere, and the enemy might already be one step ahead. Human stories punctuated the statistics, bringing the stakes into sharp focus. Families in England and America waited anxiously for letters that never arrived. Fellow operatives mourned colleagues who had been swallowed by the unknown, unsure if they had been captured, killed, or were forced into hiding. A coded message from a French resistance member, intercepted but never delivered, read simply, "He did not arrive. I fear the worst. Continue but watch all shadows." Such entries illustrate the relentless tension under which couriers operated, and the emotional toll of disappearing without a trace, leaving only uncertainty and grief behind. As the autumn of 1943 approached, Allied intelligence faced an urgent dilemma. Missions could not be postponed, for every delay meant lost opportunities to gather critical intelligence ahead of planned operations in 1944. Yet continuing under these conditions was perilous. New couriers were trained rapidly, but each was acutely aware of the growing list of vanished colleagues. Every assignment carried the implicit question: would this mission end in success, or would they too vanish into the same void that had claimed so many before? The stage was set for an escalating struggle between the Allies' determination to gather intelligence and the German efforts to disrupt it, a struggle that would reveal both the courage and the fragility of those who moved unseen through the shadows of occupied Europe. By late 1943, the situation for Allied couriers had reached a critical point. A series of failed rendezvous and vanished operatives in northern Italy, the French Riviera, and the industrial hubs of Belgium suggested a coordinated threat rather than isolated accidents. OSS investigators and SOE command officers began to suspect that some of their networks had been infiltrated. The disappearances were no longer random. They pointed to the unsettling possibility of double agents, compromised safe houses, and a German intelligence apparatus that had grown increasingly sophisticated. Each missing courier left gaps in the operational picture, raising fears that entire missions could collapse if the intelligence chain was broken. One case underscored the growing peril. In September 1943, an American OSS courier, codenamed Falcon, was tasked with transporting microfilm detailing German troop movements from Turin to Marseille. Surveillance reports indicated he had been followed from a railway station in Milan by men posing as civilians. By the time he reached the outskirts of the French border, he had vanished. Subsequent investigations revealed a trail of partially destroyed safe houses and forged documents, suggesting that German counterintelligence had not only tracked him but may have systematically dismantled his support network. The loss was not merely a matter of missing paperwork, it represented a critical breach in the flow of intelligence crucial for planning upcoming Allied operations in southern Europe. Human testimony from those still active in the networks paints a vivid portrait of the constant danger. Diaries, letters, and post-war accounts describe the claustrophobic tension of moving unseen in enemy territory. One SOE operative wrote from Lyon, "I no longer trust the faces that smile at me. Every friendly gesture feels like a knife waiting to strike." The anxiety was compounded by the fact that some of the couriers had begun to suspect that betrayal came not only from the Germans but from collaborators within local resistance groups. The intricate network of safe houses, once a source of protection, became a source of suspicion. The psychological toll on operatives, fear, isolation, and the need for constant vigilance, was nearly as lethal as the physical dangers they faced. Historical records provide additional insight into the German side of the operations. WWII files, later captured by the Allies, reveal that German intelligence had indeed targeted Allied courier routes, using double agents to intercept messages and neutralize operatives. Some couriers were captured and executed. Others were forced into temporary hiding, their disappearance creating confusion and delaying crucial operations. The Germans' success at disrupting these missions underscores the complexity and peril of intelligence work in occupied Europe. Every mission required careful planning, but the human and logistical variables made complete security impossible. Despite these setbacks, the Allies continued to innovate. The OSS introduced new encryption methods, changed delivery schedules, and increased coordination with local resistance cells to reduce the risk of interception. Couriers were trained to recognize surveillance, improvise safe passages, and identify potential threats even in familiar streets. Yet, even with these precautions, success was not guaranteed. For every mission completed and every message delivered, there were those like Falcon whose fates remain uncertain, illustrating the razor-thin margin between triumph and catastrophe in covert operations. The strategic implications were enormous. Intelligence lost to disappearances could delay operational planning for critical campaigns, such as the upcoming Allied invasion of southern France and the preparations for D-Day. Commanders faced the dual challenge of continuing vital intelligence operations while accounting for the increasingly precarious safety of their operatives. Each missing courier not only disrupted the transmission of information but also heightened the psychological strain across the network, sowing doubt and fear among those still in the field. By the end of 1943, a stark reality had set in. The disappearance of Allied couriers was no longer merely a series of unfortunate events. It was a systemic vulnerability that demanded immediate attention. Commanders, intelligence officers, and field operatives alike understood that the next months would test both their ingenuity and courage. The human cost of intelligence work was clear, and the stakes could not have been higher. The story of the missing couriers, shrouded in secrecy and danger, continued to unfold, leaving historians and operatives alike questioning the true scope of what had been lost, and whether the networks could survive the relentless scrutiny of the enemy in the months to come. Early 1944 marked a turning point in the Allied response to the spate of courier disappearances across Europe. Commanders recognized that simply sending more operatives into the same vulnerable routes would only perpetuate losses. In Belgium, France, and northern Italy, the Allies began coordinating daring recovery and counterintelligence operations, often working alongside local resistance networks. Paratroopers, disguised agents, and specialized retrieval teams were deployed to investigate compromised safe houses, recover stolen documents, and attempt to locate missing couriers. Each mission carried immense risk, as German forces had intensified patrols, doubled security around key transport hubs, and relied on informants embedded within the civilian population. One of the most audacious operations occurred near Marseille in February 1944. An SOE operative codenamed Lark was sent to assess the status of two couriers who had vanished weeks earlier while transporting strategic maps to Allied command. Using a combination of forged identity papers, clandestine train passages, and guidance from the local French resistance, Lark infiltrated the city undetected. The safe houses were in disarray, some destroyed, others under the watchful eyes of collaborators. Among the ruins of one house, Lark discovered coded messages partially destroyed, suggesting the couriers had been intercepted and likely taken by German forces. The operation highlighted both the ingenuity of Allied field operatives and the devastating reach of German counterintelligence. The human element of these missions cannot be overstated. Diaries and letters from surviving couriers recount the constant psychological strain, the fear of being followed, the anxiety of each knock at the door, and the uncertainty about whom to trust. An American OSS agent wrote, "Every street corner feels like a crossroads between life and oblivion. One misstep and you cease to exist in the world of the living." These testimonies offer a window into the hidden courage required for missions that rarely received public recognition, and they illustrate why the disappearance of a single courier could ripple across the network, undermining morale and operational cohesion. From a historical perspective, German intelligence had been meticulously cataloging courier patterns. Abwehr and Gestapo units were aware of frequently used routes, the timing of trains, and even the locations of resistance cells. In response, Allied operatives had to adapt quickly, using impromptu routes through rural villages, crossing borders at unconventional points, and relying on less-known resistance contacts. The constant improvisation demanded not only bravery but exceptional situational awareness and local knowledge. Any error could lead to capture, and, in some cases, execution. Despite these extraordinary efforts, some couriers remained unaccounted for. Investigators pieced together partial information: a train conductor recalling a suspicious passenger, a local shopkeeper noting an unmarked arrest, or fragments of coded messages discovered in abandoned safe houses. Yet, no definitive answers emerged for all cases, leaving lingering questions about the fates of missing agents. These unresolved mysteries underscored the perilous nature of intelligence operations during the war and emphasized the delicate interplay between planning, courage, and chance in occupied territories. Strategically, the timing of these recoveries was critical. Allied planners were preparing for Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion, and intelligence gaps created by missing couriers threatened to compromise the coordination with French resistance cells and delay critical information on German defenses. Each courier who had disappeared left a void that could affect thousands of soldiers' lives in the upcoming campaigns. Commanders understood that restoring operational security, even partially, was essential to maintain momentum and reduce the risk of catastrophic failure. By mid-1944, a tentative picture emerged of both the successes and failures in the ongoing struggle to secure the network of couriers. Recovery operations had salvaged some critical intelligence and provided valuable lessons for future missions. Yet the fate of certain individuals remained unknown, their stories lost to the shadowy corridors of wartime Europe. As the Allies readied themselves for the monumental challenges ahead, the lingering uncertainty of missing couriers added an undercurrent of tension. Even as plans were laid and operations scheduled, the specter of vanishing operatives loomed over every decision, a silent reminder that, in the war of shadows, no one was truly safe, and every mission carried the weight of life, death, and enduring mystery. As 1944 progressed, the Allied war effort intensified, with the looming D-Day invasion casting a long shadow over operations in occupied Europe. Couriers who had survived the previous waves of disappearances now carried an even heavier burden, relaying critical intelligence on German troop deployments, fortifications, and the readiness of local resistance networks. Yet the losses of previous months had created significant blind spots. The absence of the 5 vanished couriers meant gaps in communication, delayed reports, and incomplete reconnaissance. Commanders relied on the remaining operatives' extraordinary resilience, knowing that even minor errors could compromise one of the largest and most complex military operations in history. In preparation for the Normandy landings, Allied command tasked surviving couriers with ensuring that resistance groups across France were coordinated, equipped, and ready to disrupt German movements. In Brittany, couriers coordinated the supply drops of explosives and weapons, often traveling under the cover of night through bombed-out villages and patrolled forests. In some cases, they had to improvise escape routes after discovering that previously trusted safe houses had been compromised. One British SOE agent wrote in her diary, "We move like ghosts, unseen yet carrying the fate of thousands in our hands. Every message we deliver could change the tide of the war, or cost us our lives." The human courage required for these missions contrasted sharply with the impersonal machinery of war, highlighting the extraordinary stakes involved in intelligence operations. The personal cost of the earlier disappearances continued to resonate. Families of missing couriers endured uncertainty, often receiving conflicting reports or none at all. Fellow operatives carried a heavy psychological burden, haunted by the fates of colleagues who had vanished into the night. In letters preserved after the war, one OSS operative reflected, "We work in the shadows and sometimes the shadows swallow our friends. We cannot falter though for the sake of those still waiting for what we carry." These testimonies underscore the emotional complexity of covert operations. Loyalty, bravery, and grief were intertwined in every mission. From a tactical perspective, the disappearances highlighted the vulnerability of even the most meticulously planned operations. German counterintelligence continued to monitor known courier routes, infiltrating resistance networks and exploiting weaknesses. The Allies responded by constantly revising codes, changing drop points, and training couriers to detect surveillance. Despite these precautions, each new operation remained fraught with risk, as couriers faced the possibility of capture or death on every journey. Operational briefings emphasized adaptability, stealth, and quick thinking, acknowledging that rigid adherence to previous protocols could prove fatal. Historical records suggest that some missing couriers may have provided the Germans with critical intelligence, intentionally or under duress. Other agents vanished under circumstances that remain unclear, leaving historians to piece together fragments of evidence from safe houses, Gestapo reports, and intercepted communications. These cases illustrate the delicate balance between operational success and failure, as well as the human vulnerability inherent in clandestine warfare. Each disappearance not only affected immediate missions but also shaped the planning and psychological readiness of those who continued the work. As the Allied forces approached D-Day, surviving couriers became linchpins of the operation. Their role in ensuring timely communication between resistance cells and command centers was indispensable for sabotage missions, diversionary attacks, and intelligence gathering. Despite the successes, the memory of the 5 vanished couriers haunted planners and operatives alike. Each mission completed was a triumph, but the cost of those who had disappeared remained a silent warning. Even the bravest, most skilled operatives were not invincible. The narrative of courage, sacrifice, and unresolved mystery persisted, underscoring the stakes of intelligence work in occupied Europe. By the eve of D-Day, the remaining network of couriers had achieved a fragile stability. Intelligence flowed more reliably, and resistance activities were synchronized with the larger Allied offensive. Yet, beneath this apparent order lingered the question of the missing agents. What had truly become of them? Were they captured, executed, or forced into hiding? These uncertainties cast a shadow over even the most successful operations, emphasizing that in the world of espionage and clandestine missions, the line between triumph and loss was extraordinarily thin. The courage of those who remained would be tested as the war entered its decisive phase, carrying forward the legacy of those who had disappeared into the unknown. With the end of World War II on the horizon, Allied intelligence began the painstaking task of piecing together the fates of the vanished couriers. Post-war investigations in France, Belgium, and Italy relied on captured German records, resistance testimonies, and interviews with surviving operatives to reconstruct what had happened. Some couriers were confirmed to have been captured and executed by the Gestapo, their deaths buried in unmarked graves or reported only in enemy documents. Others had vanished so completely that even the most meticulous cross-referencing could not determine their fates. The story of these disappearances highlighted the inherent danger of intelligence work and the heavy, often unseen human cost that had been paid to secure Allied victories. One particularly poignant case involved a British SOE courier operating in Lyon in early 1944. Records indicate that she was last seen entering a Gestapo safe house disguised as a residence, carrying critical plans for the upcoming D-Day operations. Her colleagues never received word of her fate, and post-war investigations could only confirm that the building had been destroyed in a German retreat. The courage and sacrifice of such individuals, though largely anonymous at the time, became emblematic of the silent heroism that defined the covert war across occupied Europe. Diaries recovered decades later revealed her own reflections. "I do not know if I shall return, but the work must go on. The world depends on unseen hands." In some cases, couriers had been forced into hiding, living under assumed identities until liberation. These stories, though rare, underscore the unpredictability of espionage. One OSS operative who survived clandestine capture recounted evading detection for months in a rural French village, relying entirely on the local population for food, shelter, and guidance. The psychological and physical toll was immense, illustrating the extraordinary resilience required to navigate such perilous circumstances. Even when survival was achieved, the lasting effects of fear, isolation, and trauma lingered, shaping post-war lives and perspectives. Historians examining these disappearances have noted patterns that reveal both the ingenuity and the vulnerability of wartime intelligence networks. German counterintelligence had successfully infiltrated certain cells, exploited weaknesses in courier training, and anticipated standard operational patterns. In contrast, the adaptability of remaining operatives, along with the courage of resistance fighters, ensured that critical intelligence continued to reach Allied command. The interplay of strategy, improvisation, and human endurance defined the clandestine war, demonstrating how much depended on the skill and nerve of a few individuals operating in constant danger. The legacy of the missing couriers extends beyond operational history. Their disappearances serve as a somber reminder of the personal sacrifices made during wartime espionage. Each vanished agent represented a potential turning point in the flow of information, a silent witness to the stakes of global conflict. In the years following the war, families, historians, and surviving operatives sought to honor their memory, piecing together fragmented stories to ensure that courage was remembered even when outcomes were unresolved. Museums, archival records, and posthumous honors have preserved their narratives, emphasizing both their heroism and the enduring mysteries surrounding their fates. Ultimately, the story of the 5 classified Allied courier disappearances across Europe underscores the complex, perilous nature of intelligence work during World War II. While some answers emerged through painstaking investigation, others remain elusive, leaving unanswered questions that continue to fascinate historians and the public alike. The missing couriers exemplify the tension between secrecy and survival, duty and danger, illustrating that the War of Shadows carried consequences as profound as those fought on the front lines. Their courage, ingenuity, and sacrifice remain emblematic of the unseen battles that shaped the outcome of the conflict. As we reflect on these historical events, the final chapter is one of quiet reverence mixed with enduring mystery. The vanished couriers, whether lost to enemy hands, hidden by circumstance, or untraceable through history, leave behind a legacy that informs our understanding of war, espionage, and human resilience. Their stories remind us that in the broader narrative of World War II, not all heroes are known, and some victories were achieved in silence, carried on the shoulders of those who disappeared into the unknown. The question of their fate lingers, a solemn echo across the decades, challenging us to honor their courage and remember the unseen costs of freedom.